What are the absolute best changes that could be made to the Heroic World servers today? Well, as some of you guys know, about 6 months ago, Maplestory Korea had removed Maplestory Reboot from their official servers. And since then, it has been on the GMS development team and Inkwell to improve the quality of life and the game itself on their own. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the top 5 changes that Maplestory Heroic Worlds could make to improve the game quality for the better. Over the past 6 months, we've seen a lot of great changes from the development team over at Nexon America, but in this video, we're going to be talking about what can take this server to the next level. Of course, there are a ton of changes that can always be made to every single game, and nothing will ever be perfect, but in this video, we're going to be going over what I believe are the top 5 most important changes that can be made to this server. Now, all of these changes do have importance, but I'm going to be going over this list from what I think is the most important to the least important. So starting off with number 1, we're going to be talking about increasing the EXP. As some of you guys do remember, Maplestory Reboot did used to have an EXP passive in the Reboot passive. Now, in the past, this Reboot passive was removed, and this was a change that was ported over to us from Nexon Korea. Now, the reason why I think that this has such a big importance on the server itself is because of the amount of time it takes to actually get to the levels needed to clear the current content in the game. In the past, you only needed to get to level 275, 280, and maybe level 285 to clear the most endgame bosses and get the most amount of final damage on these bosses. But as of recently, getting to level 290 and even level 295 is almost a must for anybody in the Reboot world to actually clear these bosses. Now, getting to these levels is an absolute must, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit later in this video. But essentially, you want to get to level 290 and 295 to gain the most amount of final damage on these bosses, which essentially is needed to clear these bosses. And like I said before, I'm going to get into the final damage needed later on in the video. Now, with the current release of the Talhart maps, it has made getting from level 290 to 295 more accessible, but even then, the ask for players to go from level 285 to 295 is quite a large amount of time and quite a large amount of EXP. Now, if you actually take a look at all the other servers, Maplestory GMS Heroic servers has the most difficult time actually gaining EXP. We have the lowest amount of EXP rates. We have the least amount of accessibility to things like MVPs, 2x coupons, 3x coupons, and even 4x coupons. Now, with all these things being said, it makes it extremely challenging to actually push past levels 285, 290, and even 295. If you look at other servers like KMS, TMS, JMS, and even GMS reg server worlds, all these other servers have a much easier time getting to these higher levels. Now, the reason why they have such an easier time getting to these higher levels is things like having the access to actually purchase 2x coupons, purchase MVPs, having things like totems in the game. Now, I'm not saying that totems are the key to fixing this. I absolutely do not like totems, but they are things that help other servers get to these higher levels. Now, for example, I want to take a look at the actual MRX. Now, essentially what MRX is a tracker that shows the amount of EXP that you gain per day on your account. Now, we're going to take a look at my main Oreclo and see how much EXP I'm getting a day. Now, I'm currently averaging 7.4 T a day, and this is a lot of hours. Like, I'm talking anywhere from 3 to potentially 5 WAPs per day, and I'm gaining 7.4 T average over a 7-day span. Now, if we go and take a look at characters in the regular server worlds, we can see them gaining EXP rates all the way up to 43 T in a single day. And this isn't just like one player. There's a lot of players in this server that are able to acquire this amount of EXP. If you just go down the rankings from the top players in the world, you can see that they're averaging almost always over 10 T per day. And yes, of course, they do have totems in their server, but that is not the only reason why they're able to gain such an abundance of EXP. It's because they have the access to being able to purchase MVP coupons, purchase 2x coupons, and they just have an oversupply of EXP multipliers. I think the best way to actually go about solving this problem in the heroic worlds is either number one, making EXP multipliers more accessible for more players, or just giving the EXP passive back from what we originally had from the start. The EXP passive was put into the reboot world to solve this exact problem because of the limited amount of EXP multipliers that this world actually has, and I think it would be a great change made to the server. So now that we've gone over the EXP changes and the reasons why I believe that this is such a big problem, let's move on to number 2, and this is going to be drops. Now, what about drops? And I know the first thing that comes to your guys' mind is going to be pitch boss drops. And yes, this is a massive problem in the reboot worlds. And although we do sign up for a Iron Man type server, having such limited access to these drops can be a potential problem for players. In the heroic world, as most of you guys know, you cannot trade with anybody and you cannot trade equips throughout your account. When trying to enter endgame content, you are sometimes limited by the amount of drops that you do actually get. For example, I've been clearing the boss Vihilla for over 3 years now, and I've only seen a singular source of suffering drop. Now, what do I think is the actual solution to this problem? Well, number one would be to just increase the actual drop rate. I know it says that we have a 6x multiplier for Miso, but it doesn't actually directly state if we have a 6x multiplier for equipment drop rate. Whether we do or don't, I do believe that the drop rate should be increased in the heroic worlds, or the other option would be to allow players to transfer items within their account. Now, obviously, transferring items within the account could potentially break the actual balance of the server, so making it something like a one-time transfer when you do not equip the item, making it more accessible for players to actually gain these pitch boss items. Because at the end of the day, even if you do have the pitch boss item, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go to 22. And this also doesn't give you an unlimited amount in regular servers where you can just continuously purchase and purchase and purchase the item over and over and over again until you actually get it to 22. You still have to get the drop on your account through a mule or through your main. Now, the other thing as well that I want to talk about with drops is a potential solution to the number one problem, and that is to increase the MVP drop rate. I remember for a short period of time they had stated that the reboot drop rate was potentially bugged and the drop rate was increased more than intended, and in that 1 week of time that felt like a balanced amount of MVP drops for the server. You actually had enough MVPs to train throughout the week, as compared to right now, sometimes you can only get 3 MVPs for killing all of C10 on a single mule. I think increasing the drop rate of EXP multipliers would also be a great solution to the drop problem, but also help solve the number one problem for EXP. And the last problem underneath drops is going to be grindstones and enhancements. Now, I'm not necessarily saying they have to buff every single thing in reboot. I don't think that's always the best solution, because this can sometimes break the balance of a server. But I think making grindstones and making the enhancements instance for players versus having to have shared loot throughout the entire party could be a great way to actually solve this issue. Grindstones only have a 10% chance of actually going through, and when you're in a party of 6, sometimes you're only limited to seeing 1 to maybe 2 grindstones every 3 months if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, it can go even further. And then for enhancements, the enhancement drop rate is so abysmally low in reboot that you're pretty much lucky if you even see 1 enhancement per year. And being in a party of 6, I mean, well, you can do the math on that. It's going to take you about 6 years on average to actually get an enhancement for your item. I think making these things instant would be a great solution to this problem without breaking the actual balance of the game. So now moving on from the drops problem, let's go on to the reboot final damage issue. The reboot final damage issue is a pretty big issue that a lot of people like to talk about, and one of the biggest reasons why people actually talk about the final damage issue is because that was literally one of the reasons why they removed the reboot server in KMS. It was because the reboot servers were not going to be able to keep up with future content moving forward, and they were not going to have enough damage to clear the current and future endgame bosses. Now, of course, slapping on 30 FD to a server is not always the correct option or correct answer to fixing the solution, but there could be other options like adding in scrolling or potentially adding in bonus potentials. Now, I know obviously there has to be a difference between the heroic worlds and the regular server worlds, and I totally understand that, but having some access to gaining final damage in the reboot server, whether it would be through a passive or whether it would be through an extra upgrading system in this server, one of those two options would be a great change to actually making endgame content more accessible through the general public. Now, I know what you guys are probably thinking, well, Jake, you already cleared the endgame bosses, you're already doing hard limbo. And as that is true, we are only able to clear these endgame bosses because of a compressed meta, and that compressed meta at the moment is essentially being able to clear with a Lin. Now, if you remove Lin from the game and you nerf Lin, this now brings down the amount of parties clearing this endgame content probably by 70%. And I think the best way to actually go about fixing this change would just be to add back the reboot final damage passive. And if that's something that wouldn't want to be done, I think adding bonus potentials or potentially scrolling, whichever one it would be a great solution to this problem. Give people something to work towards and give people something to upgrade to gain more final damage to be able to clear the current and future endgame bosses. Now, number 4 is something that we've already talked about here on this channel, but I am going to mention it in this list because it is something that I believe is one of the top 5 changes made to heroic servers, and that is going to be the familiar situation. Now, obviously, if you guys have not already seen the video, you can go and check it out. I already went over everything in that video of what I think that they should do to correct this system in the game. We'll talk about it anyway in this video for the sake of the video purposes. I think the best way about fixing this actual problem would just be to add familiars to all regions to the game, and number 2 would just be adding blue cards being able to be purchasable through Miso, the heroic currency, unlimited times to allow players to make upgrades on their familiars, which would indirectly solve problem number 3 of giving more final damage to reboot players. Familiars could be such an amazing piece of content and add such an extra layer to this server if they were to do it correctly. So I think this is something that I definitely want to see changes on in the future, and I do believe that this change and all the other changes listed in this video are going to be applied at some point in the future. The heroic servers have shown such an amazing increase in player population, and of course, if we take a look at the actual revenue from Nexon, we've seen such a big increase in the revenue year over year. So I have very, very high expectations and great optimism for the development team over at GMS on making these changes possible in the future. So now moving on from problem number 4 and moving into our last but not least problem, that is going to be cash shop changes. Now, this isn't the biggest change in the world, and it's not the end all be all change, but I did want to include this in this list as I did think this was somewhat of importance to have in this list. And this is going to be cash shop changes. Now, what exactly do I mean by cash shop changes? Well, number 1, I mean having the ability and accessibility to actually transfer items throughout your account an unlimited amount of times throughout the year. Currently, you're able to transfer items throughout your account 2 times per year, and you're only able to transfer them throughout 1 week period, which puts a lot of restrictions on how you actually go about moving NX from character to character. And I think this is just a bad change overall. Let players transfer the NX, let players transfer cosmetics across their account when they want to and how they want to, and don't limit them to 1 week's period of time. It's just a silly thing that they have in the game, and I don't see a reason for it at all. This also bleeds into vac pets being able to be purchased year-round and not limited to 2 sales per year. There have been countless amount of times that I've ran into newer players in this game that are looking to buy a vac pet because it has become such a necessity now in Maplestory to have a vac pet that the quality of life when playing Maplestory is just not the same when you do not have a vac pet. And limiting these vac pets to only being able to be purchased 2 times per year is just not a good way to go about it. I think that if they're they're gonna do limited sales per year, they could do things like limited boss set sales per year, or make something where it's a unique style of a vac pet sold 2 times per year, but just allow players to purchase the base vac pet year round, because I do think that this would really keep new player retention at a much higher rate, because of how many times I've seen newer players come into the game, not be able to purchase a vac pet, and then end up quitting because they couldn't get a vac pet and the quality of life while playing the game just wasn't the same. So we've now talked about the top 5 changes in the game, starting off with EXP, drops, final damage changes, familiar changes, and cash shop changes. Let me know what you guys think about this list. Let me know if you guys think that I missed anything in this list. But as always, I hope you guys did enjoy the video for today. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take it easy. Peace.